Good morning and welcome, or I guess good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining our virtual focus forum. Our topic today is healing the earth and the implications of COVID-19 for the environment. I'm Rita Riker, president of the board of Focus Greater Syracuse, and I'm pleased to welcome you all and delighted that our distinguished panelists are with us today, Neil Murphy and Ed Michalenko. They will be formally introduced to you in just a minute. Today's forum is our second in a series of forums focused on the implications of how we are coping with COVID-19. Focus sees these forums as an important aspect of our mission to encourage citizen engagement and to listen. We are happy to report that, similar to our last virtual forum, nearly 100 people have registered for this forum. Very exciting for us. Before we get started, just a few things about our webinar format today. This forum is scheduled for 1 hour, and we will be recording today's session. After a brief introduction, our panelists will each present for about 12 to 15 minutes. That will be followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A, where we will address as many of your questions as possible. Thank you to those of you who've submitted questions ahead of time. If you have a question, we encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Board member Amy Rood will be monitoring the Q&A. Also, feel free to use the Q&A to suggest ideas for future forums. We hope to have time at the end to unmute those on the phone so that you can ask a question. If you have trouble using Zoom online, please try dialing in using the alternate phone number, meeting number, and password included in your invitation. We have also placed that information in the chat box. Finally, we encourage you to complete a very brief survey that you will receive after this forum to better understand your experience with this format. Now, I'm very pleased to turn this over to board member Bob Haley, who will introduce our panelists. Bob?
Yes, thank you, Rita. We welcome here two speakers today, Dr. Ed Michalenko and Dr. Neil Murphy. Both have extensive careers in environmental practice and teaching. Their full resumes are available on our website, although there's still a body of, in the progress of adding to these resumes. I think that's one of the goals here that's interesting. These are extensive resumes with a lot of great detail. Our first speaker today is Dr. Neil Murphy. Neil has begun with O'Brien and Gear as an engineer, a science and environmental engineer. And I enjoyed the fact that he started as a lab technician at O'Brien and Gear a few years ago and moved to president and chairman of the board. Neil also, during those years of working in engineering and science and in the environment, developed 5 other environmental engineering businesses and service corporations in different subsets of environmental engineering, primarily with water, waste, and so on. From 2000 to 2013, Neil was president of SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. The academic side of both of these gentlemen is enjoyable in the sense of their passion for the environment and teaching. He's a senior fellow, environmental science and sustainable system for SUNY. Still with more time on his hands, he's been a terrific champion of local boards, from the Audubon Society to the Governor's Renewable Energy Task Force. Quite an extensive, again, impact. One of the things I like that Neil's left that you don't really see is there's a gateway building project at SUNY Forestry, which is a building that demonstrates the themes, the concept of the environment. It becomes a teaching tool. The Gateway Center by the architects Architectura and their creative team found a way to demonstrate energy efficiency and environmental sustainability. And it's all around you. When you walk through that building, you see the passive solar and water retention, as well as the fact that you learn that it's co-generating, producing 20 to 25% of the building's energy through today's technology leading to the future. Now there's a small item that's not too extensive in Neil's resume, but fantastic. The current local goal, one thing that Neil's concerned about is learning the good lessons from COVID-19. Neil, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bob. And I welcome all of you that are joining us this afternoon. You know, this has been a very, very difficult year for all of us. You know, we're in angst every morning when we watch the news and also every evening. And the pandemic seems as though it is actually encompassing us and engaging us. And certainly tragic global and local loss of life, the loss of fiscal security, loss of jobs, the impact of the tragedy, particularly bothering me on our youth, on their education and their development. But we also look for the positive news. And fortunately, we've been able to see a lot of positive news. Certainly our tireless healthcare workers have done an incredible job, and the thousands and thousands of volunteers that make the lives of those who have suffered at most a little bit better. And so as we look to the environment, I think we've got also some very positive news. There are lessons that we can learn concerning the impact of the pandemic on our global environment that I think will serve us very well for the future. And some have actually suggested that from an environmental standpoint, the pandemic may be a blessing in disguise. We have observed and learned lessons that will reduce humankind's pollution, and we understand better the lesson that nature has the ability to reclaim itself. Dr. Malik from the University of Sydney frames the current picture very well. We are all experiencing the worst economic shock since the Great Depression, while at the same time, we have experienced the greatest drop in greenhouse gas emissions since the burning of fossil fuels began. We'll examine this between Ed and myself and discuss what we have learned about this. The University of Sydney study has shown that the global greenhouse gases during the pandemic has declined by 2.5 gigatons. Now, I have to define what a gigaton means. It's basically 1 billion tons of aggregate greenhouse gas emissions. And this compares to some of the previous reductions, 0.46 gigatons during the great financial crisis that we had in 2009, 2008, 2.2 gigatons, the reduction that followed the signing of the Kyoto Protocol and its implementation in 1998. And that was largely through land use planning and land use changes. Now, 2.5 gigaton reduction of greenhouse gases represents, during the pandemic, represents the largest of any drop in greenhouse gas emissions in human history. In China, the lockdowns and other pandemic control measures resulted in a 25% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions and a 50% reduction in nitrogen dioxide emissions, resulting in a cleaner and healthier air to breathe. And we have experienced similar things, which we'll be talking about. Now, there are some very visible things globally, just from simply keeping our eyes open and watching, that these environmental observations have been very positive relative to the duration of the pandemic. In Venice, the water in the canals of Venice have cleared and have experienced greater flow due to low boat traffic and decreases in atmospheric deposition of contaminants into the canal. We see, for example, the observation of increases in fish biodiversity in the European Union waters. Now, that's largely because the fishing fleets have not been able to go out of port. Sea turtles have been laying eggs on beaches that has never ever happened before, largely because the water is cleaner and reduced a population density of humankind. And a really beautiful surprise gift to the residents of Punjab, India, where the decline in emissions brought the ability to see the Himalayan mountain range from that village for the first time in almost 30 years. And in many cities, photos of animals roaming once congested streets, they've gone viral. And these are native populations of animals. NASA is one of those agencies that is doing a great job in both observing and documenting changes in our atmosphere as a result of the pandemic. Those satellites have what are called multispectral scanners, where they can pick out specific pollutants. And they also rely on ground sensors for validation and computer-based data sets to make comparisons to historical concentrations. And they're used by scientists to determine the environmental, economic, and societal impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, Dr. Jennifer Kaiser from Georgia Tech and her colleagues are looking at COVID-19 travel bans and lockdown orders and what that has meant in terms of air quality around airports. And this is important because it might give us a feel for when we finally make the transition to electric vehicles, what might our air quality actually be? And the future looks bright. It really does look bright. And they're finding much better air quality with the less traffic. Nitrogen dioxide is released in the atmosphere by any device that burns basically a fuel, whether it be cars or whether it be airplanes. And that nitrogen dioxide can react with other things in the atmosphere to produce ozone. We also find that aircraft in their exhaust have formaldehyde, which is a significant contaminant. And overall, we have found that the quality of life around BWI Airport and the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport has dramatically improved during the pandemic. Overall traffic at both airports are down 60 to 70%. And these spectrometers are showing the contaminants being sharply reduced and air quality obviously significantly improved. These findings are also supported by a satellite that NASA has, the Aurora satellite, which has detected significant reductions in our atmosphere of nitrogen dioxide. That the signal of absorption by light by nitrogen dioxide. One preliminary report showed that nitrogen dioxide, its signal, as the Aurora satellite circulates the globe, plummeted drastically over China, likely the result of less coal being burned and to produce electric power. Now, let's look at the other side of the question. The COVID-19 pandemic has likely had some negative impacts on the environment. And these negative impacts have to be understood. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in cover for illegal activities affecting the environment. So what are some of those activities? Deforestation of our tropical forests. Specifically in Brazil. Satellite imagery has shown deforestation surging by over 50% during the period of the pandemic. Why? It was a source basically of the indigenous peoples to frankly get some logging done, to expand their agricultural plantings, a whole bunch of reasons. And we've also seen that through CDC that has suggested that there are 3 or 4 new infection diseases coming from animals. And we have seen in the case of Africa, an increased poaching, for example, of natural exotic animals in Africa. So what do we learn from this? I think what we learn from this is that there are ecosystem management practices that can be applied that would reduce future risk of pandemic from these zoonotic diseases. A recent article in Science, the authors suggested that 2 new viruses a year move from the natural hosts to basically humans. These include MERS, SARS, HIV diseases, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. We can't allow the continued damage from those zoonotic diseases, what they perpetuate. If we make some modest payments and investments, we can reduce the impact of these wildlife disease reservoirs on humankind. And this could be accomplished by reducing the loss and fragmentation of our tropical forests and putting controls on this burgeoning wildlife trade. It's been estimated that $9.6 billion would make a big impact on forest protection and reduction in deforestation. It had been suggested that 40% of the areas could be particularly in Brazil, could be reduced in terms of deforestation. Those areas being areas that have a high risk for these virus spillovers. In China, wildlife farming and trade is approximately a $20 billion industry. And this could be sharply reduced by finding alternate ways to have 15 million people serve themselves and their families. Now, given human and economic costs with emerging pandemic risks, we should very much consider these ecosystem management programs to reduce human risk in the future. Now, the big question I think that we all have is, will 2020 be a defining year for the planet? And in a recent article in Time magazine, Justin Moreland said, this could be our one last chance. In the future, hopefully, we will look back at 2020 as the year when we decided not to keep driving off the climate cliff, but rather take the last exit. This world already has warmed 1.1 degrees C, and frankly, the Northeast in this last year has warmed 1.5 degrees C. And if we pass 2 degrees C, we risk hitting a tipping point in which returning from that would be extraordinarily difficult. The COVID pandemic gives us a good start with a projection reduction of CO2 emissions of 7% this year. And in terms of fossil fuel emissions, they've been down 17% from what they were in January. This is a good way to jumpstart the global economy, to help protect the environmental gains during the pandemic. The International Energy Agency calls for a $1 trillion investment in clean energy each year for the next 3 years. This would help solve the immediate problem of lost jobs. It would create some 10 million jobs globally and increase the global gross domestic product by 1%. So what do some of these countries propose to do? South Korea has proposed a $10 billion Green New Deal. Rwanda, a very small country with a GDP of only $9 billion, has adopted an $11 billion plan to reduce carbon emissions and create jobs. The IMF has contributed $1 trillion in lending capacity and to make climate resilience a key criteria for lending. 50 developing countries have committed to address climate change in their pandemic recovery plans. And China appears to be on the road for a $1 trillion investment in new infrastructure, specifically focusing on electric vehicle charging stations and high-speed rail. Now, the one thing we have to ask ourselves is, where is the US in this picture? To date, we have not done what we should have done. We have a great opportunity to help nature repair and nurture our planet. We can't allow this opportunity to pass us by. And I'll finish with two quotes that I have been reminded of in putting some of these notes down. One, the first is from Albert Einstein, the wizard of mathematics and physics. And he said, look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better. This from an individual who put his life into mathematics and physics. And then the second is from Rachel Carson. In nature, nothing exists alone. And that is a lesson that we have learned so far this year. I thank you very much for having the opportunity to chat with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Our second speaker today to continue this discussion is Dr. Ed Michalenko, who is the current town supervisor for the town of DeWitt and managing 135 employees, multi-million-dollar budgets in a town context. Ed has been the president also of a not-for-profit in Onondaga Environmental Institute, working with many grants throughout our area on everything from the Onondaga Creek revitalization to Onondaga Nation support for water treatment. He's also a teacher. He's been teaching at Lemoyne, Syracuse University, and SUNY ESF. The small point about Ed is that he's an action guy. He's helped take the town of DeWitt to put a solar farm capping the former DeWitt Town Hall, or the DeWitt landfill project, and also solar on the roof of the DeWitt Town Hall. So it's a matter of taking action today to reduce the demand and the budgets expended by towns and villages for the future. His current goal is thinking about reducing dependency on fossil fuels. Ed, welcome.
I want to thank you. Thank you. Thank everyone that's listening in today, and I want to thank Focus Greater Syracuse for hosting this forum. I'm honored to participate. I want to thank Rita Reichner, Bob Haley, and Nancy Smith, and I'm also honored to take part in this webinar alongside Neil Murphy. I've worked for and observed Neil back in the early 90s when I was at O'Brien and Gear. Neil is a valued board member of the Onondaga Environmental Institute, and I consider him a friend and a mentor. I want to echo Neil's sentiments about the tragedy of the COVID pandemic. You just can't say enough about the difficulties and the problems associated with this pandemic and the loss of life. Anyways, I'm also going to spend a considerable amount of time on the theme of fossil fuel consumption and the effects of burning fossil fuels on climate change. I want to say that one of the quotes that I use all the time is that I want my grandchildren and their children to view burning fossil fuels like we view using horses for transportation. But the time has come to transition into renewable energies, and the COVID pandemic is making a very stark contrast. From a scientific standpoint, it's a great observational experiment or applied experiment because we can actually see the impacts in relatively short order of time. So some of the statistics that I've gotten from the Global Carbon Project is very similar to what Neil has to say. You know, that carbon emissions are down 20% on a global basis, 26% at the peak of the confinement. But just some of the different sectors. Power generation is down about 7.5% during this period. Industrial output is about 19 or 20% down. Transportation was down about 36%. The public sector is down 20% and aviation 60%. Ironically, with this shift to working at home in confinement and lock in place, residential CO2 output is only up 3%. So it tells you something about the structure of our society in terms of the workplace and the consumption of fossil fuels. Anyways, there's been this big push to confine ourselves, right? The response to the pandemic has required us to work at home, to stay at home, to social distance. And so it's had a profound effect on the business community. And again, there's some surprising things that we've observed, but popular press and growing body of literature that says for many businesses, productivity's increased. Commercial real estate market is businesses looking at about a 20% reduction in the footprint of offices and business requirements. They're looking at cost savings in terms of sharing workspaces. The hybrid business model could be the wave of the future, where someone reports to the office certain days of the week and they work at home other days of the week. Large urban centers are, there's a perceived danger associated with areas like New York City and LA. And so small cities, an area like Syracuse might capitalize on this, where an individual can work at home and still conduct business and over the internet. And so where there's affordable housing and a perceived greater quality of life, populations may begin to migrate or shift away from the larger, more congested and concentrated areas. Less traffic. New York City, places like LA have seen a 50% reduction in traffic at peak times. Obviously, that's translated into lower air pollution and improved air quality. For those that do commute time has dropped in half. Many cities that have lifted their quarantines have not had the rebound to pre-COVID conditions in terms of traffic. So the decrease in traffic volume in cities around the world has gone down, and hopefully that's something that will last. There's been exponential increases in the internet. Internet activity is up 70%, data usage is up about 50%. The average residential broadband consumption has increased from about 275 gigabytes to about 405 gigabytes. There's multiple reasons for this. It's the work at home, telemedicine increase, gaming and entertainment, items such as Netflix and Disney Plus have seen increased usership. Video conferencing. This webinar is a testimony to the increase in web communications. Things like Zoom and WebEx have taken off, and tech companies that actually own and control the internet have seen tremendous increases in their infrastructure, and therefore are well positioned for the future. COVID has demonstrated direct impacts on the burning of the fossil fuels with climate change and energy. We need to see a green recovery from COVID. Again, Neil spent a very good number of points about this, so I'll skip over a lot of these as well. But one of the things that I often cite is that we have tremendous changes in our lifetime in technology. I'll use the cell phone as an example, but most of us look at our cell phone and it'll be obsolete in 3 to 4 years. We will replace our cell phone with a new form of technology. We, as a society, have lived with the internal combustion engine for over 150 years. And we basically use it for transportation and energy production. So coming out of this, there's a global movement to look at COVID, the impacts that burning fossil fuels have had. And even at the national level, if you look right now, I've been watching the Democratic convention, there is a tremendous amount of discussion about the national impact and movement towards renewable energies, but the Biden and Democratic platform has a strong initiative towards renewable energies. New York State is, in many other states around the country, despite the lack of federal involvement, are looking for new green deals. Governor Cuomo has advocated a path to carbon neutrality. We're looking at 100% clean power by 2040. He's looking to invest $1.5 billion in 20 large-scale renewable energy projects in upstate New York. I hope you don't mind. I'll use a little bit here as a commercial for the town of DeWitt, but we recently constructed a 2.6 megawatt solar farm. We have a 55 kW roof mounted system on Town Hall. We've performed a number of retrofits to all our building lighting. We've decreased our electric consumption in those facilities by 55%. We recently, with National Grid, converted all our street lighting to LED. We've purchased some electric vehicles and installed electric charging stations. We've got plans for more electric charging stations. And we're, as a organization, completely free of fossil fuel consumption for electricity. All our buildings, our facilities, our water and sewer pumps, and our street lights are powered through the generation of renewable power. COVID and the quarantine has also highlighted the role and the need for parks, open space, and green spaces. But because of the quarantine, people have needed greater contact with nature. You know, humans by nature, we're social animals, and we need to get out. And so trails, walking and hiking, exercise, jogging and biking, contact with nature provides solitude, but study after study has showed it's good for mental as well as physical health. That activities and contact with nature, you avoid chronic disease, it increases happiness and mood improvement, reduces stress, fewer illnesses. And so there's a number of ways in which we can improve green space and human contact. It improves the quality of life and increases property values. At a local scale, it's through planning boards and new development that green space and open space gardens and urban forests can be maintained. But the integration of green infrastructure oftentimes produces green areas along with your gray infrastructure. In DeWitt, we've got a couple of laws that we passed that promote green infrastructure. We have a 100-year storm requirement to be held back in the Lake Creek watershed, and that basically forces any new developer to hold the water on site because they have to be able to hold a 100-year storm. And we also have a 100-foot wetland buffer on top of the state's wetland protection laws, and that we don't say you can't develop within that 100-foot buffer, but you have to use green infrastructure. So the design for recreation and aesthetics and stormwater management can reduce flooding and increase habitat. Sites to systems and networks can be performed, and I'll just cite a couple examples, but infrastructure such as a sewer line can be converted to a trail. The High Line in New York City was a aged rail system that's been converted into green space and open space that has had tremendous benefit. In DeWitt, we're looking at completing trail systems and putting pocket parks in place all along Route 481 where we have the open space. The Elevating Erie project is a good example of connecting neighborhoods to the Erie Canal system. The benefits of urban forests through shade, temperature control, stormwater removal increases property values, but the social capital is unquantifiable. In areas where concentrated cities have been reforested, you've seen less violence, less conflict, lower crime. So green space matters. These are things, again, in DeWitt, we have a tree ordinance, a tree program, a tree inventory, a forest management plan. And we've planted over 2,000 trees since in the last few years. And the benefits will begin to pay off 30 to 50 years from now, because if you plant your trees wisely, you have less storm damage after major events. And so the trees that drop on power lines are avoided because you plant smaller trees underneath those corridors and you leave your larger trees on the opposite side of the street. COVID has underscored the need for proper solid waste management and recycling. But there's been a number of articles and scientific studies that show commercial office waste is greatly reduced with people working at home. People use less paper. They rely more on less on hard copy materials in exchange over the internet of materials. So things like Google Documents, Dropbox, file transfer programs, and email have become the routine, where in past the paper and greater consumption was used. The shift to home has greatly reduced waste. On a detrimental side, obviously to business owners, less restaurant and food waste has been produced. The shutdown has forced the people to eat at home. In a residential area, about 40% of our waste is food waste. We need a better policy on managing food waste and food handling and organic composting. And this couldn't be more clear when we look at food production from its point of use, as we look at the number of people that have lost jobs and are lining up for agricultural products rather than waste those products. And so there's an opportunity in this crisis to better organize and think these policies through. There's, on the negative side, greater medical waste. U.S. is one of the countries with a better capacity for handling medical waste, but on a whole, this is another area that we need to work on. Another negative is the halt or the on hold of plastic bag bans. COVID can survive about 3 days on a plastic bag. I couldn't find any information of the long-term survivorship of COVID on a cloth bag. But COVID has forced the gig economy. Things like Amazon, we've been talking about a long time, but this is an area that's not likely to return to where it was pre-COVID, and that shopping online is going to increase, and the future is here. Recycling markets need to emerge. We need to look at how we can take material flow from producer to shipper, retailer to consumer, and back to producer. Good example of this is in some areas of Europe. A battery that's produced is sold in a package. You buy the battery, you use the battery, you put the battery back in the package, and the package becomes the mailer, and you send it back to the producer. Another good example is, for every aluminum can that we recycle, we save about a gallon of gasoline in energy costs. That's the difference between producing an aluminum can from a bauxite mine versus melting that can and recycling and producing another. So there's a tremendous opportunity again for packaging science. There's a need to reduce the volume and weight of materials and waste collection to discuss. There's an ongoing discussion, debates in larger cities over establishing collection zones or monopolies. So in summary, I'll close up with some of the environmental benefits have been less energy consumption, lower transportation. This has had profound implications on telling us how to navigate the future for climate change. There's been changes to business and the workplace. Our internet use is greatly increased, and this technology is the future, and the future is here. The implications to parks and green space and open space and proper planning of our cities and our development, and then our waste generation and our management and our needs for recycling. Many of these trends are favorable. They point out where we need to go and what we need to put in place in terms of policies and practices. In many cases, it's going to take government leadership and intervention to focus on these issues. We need to work towards a sustainable society. everything that we would do to combat climate change, we would also do to eliminate or reduce the perturbations of industrialization, pollution, and overdevelopment. And therefore, you know, these are the wise paths. And the hope and the optimism is that we'll take it for the future.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ed. This has been very good discussion and obviously a massive topic. Usually, I want to say to all of our listeners that we've passed your questions on ahead of time so that these two speakers have responded to some of your questions in that. But at this point, we usually go to other questions. I'm going to pass it over to Amy Rood, who's going to do a little Q&A for the time we have left from your previous comments. Amy?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you both. We did have one listener ask if you know about the solar panels behind the Town of Clay offices. Do you know what they power? And yeah, do either of you know about those?
I personally don't know.
I am not familiar either.
Okay. So our next question then is, do you agree that this will be a permanent positive development for the continued reduction of greenhouse gases, a cleaner and safer world?
I think that we've got a substantial momentum moving in this direction, and I feel very optimistic that that momentum will continue in the future, particularly as each of these countries, for example, are looking at greening their respective countries as part of the vehicle of getting their workforce constructively engaged.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So one of our viewers asked, how come the human population level has not been discussed by science and policy for a couple of decades? Also asking that human population growth is one of the biggest threats to our planet. It seems that COVID-19 is nature's way of keeping our population in check. What are your thoughts?
Ed, do you want to start?
I can start with the population trend, because for many of us who've been environmentalists for a long time and have had this discussion, this goes back into the 70s. Paul Ehrlich, published The Population Bomb, and there was a number of other scientists pointing this out back when the world's population was only about 4 billion. We thought those numbers were huge, and in the last 50 years, it's now doubled, and the conversation seems to have gone away. It still occurs, I think, at the intellectual or the academic level. But like all things, being an ecologist, this is multifactored, and one of the major factors, I think, is the relative decrease in global famine. But famine has occurred in the last 50 years, but it's been less than prior or predicted. And so the ability to take the world's population from 4 billion to 8 billion with the food production increases that we've seen over this past 50 years has, I think, been one of the reasons that it's been backburnered. The other is that the standard of living improves. As the standard of living improves, the population growth stabilizes or decreases. So the developed world has a decreasing population. And so the UN and a number of institutions and agencies have done a very admirable job. Things like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the UN Development Program, and the list goes on in terms of attempting to improve the standard of living in third world and developing nations. And so the focus and the energy has been placed on, trying to improve the human condition. And then the third is that for the most part, the world is swallowed up in a capitalistic economic system. And we can debate this forever, but the economic system that we live in thrives on a growing and expanding economy. And so a decreasing population tends to bring on economic slowdown. And so as you know, the United States, I think, often confuses democracy with capitalism, and they're wholly different. But as we grow as a capitalistic economy, and that in many circles is a priority, it is really shelved the population discussion because we place that emphasis on the economy over improvement of the human condition.
Yeah.
If I could add one more thing.
Sure.
I think the reason why it may not be on the front burner as much today is actually the population growth rate has decreased. It was 2.2% per year, and it is currently at 1.05% per year. I mean, that's one of the areas I think we've made progress when we look at it on a global level.
And yes, that will continue as long as the developing world is capable of improving their standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we do have a couple more questions from our viewers. One being, what can each individual do? What steps can we take to further make sure that this shutdown-induced environmental healing continues?
Maybe if I could start, Ed, and please jump in. I think there are a number of personal things. You know, I think as we purchase products and mechanical systems, we should pay more attention in terms of what the energy efficiency is of those systems. And we should tend to make decisions for those that have the highest energy use efficiency. I think the other thing is increased recycling of our products. I think we should look at what we purchase in terms of how they can be recycled. I think that that we need to think about purchasing and putting pressure on getting those electric vehicles out into the marketplace. And when they are in the marketplace, to exercise prudent decision in what we do for our next vehicle. And I think that we should demand those that are producing products to present information on the environmental life cycle of those products. And probably the very last thing is in energy. I think when we get the opportunity from National Grid to make an investment in photovoltaics, I think those are choices that we need to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Right now, community power is being pushed, and community solar. And residents have the opportunity to sign up and purchase their power that would then be originated at a solar farm and stuff. And many a company are out there right now. The standard seems to be about a 10% reduction in your electric bill. And there's opportunities if you try to negotiate maybe lower or even greater savings. But yeah, I agree with Neil.
Just one comment. Can you hear me there? I'm sorry. Yesterday, just on NPR, they were referring to the circular economy and what that is, that from beginning to end of the product to its full recycling is an area of new jobs and new efficiencies. Circular economy by William McDonough is a concept from cradle to cradle production of economy. Certainly our economy of manufacturing and use of our resources has to follow that route.
I totally agree.
Yeah. There's no reason, for example, that the glass bottle manufacturers are not receiving spent bottles. And same with plastic manufacturers or metal manufacturers, batteries, any given product. Here locally, we're fortunate in that most of our cardboard is sent back to a local cardboard producer. And so a lot of that is a recycled product. But on a national scale, right now, cardboard is a tremendous commodity because the gig economy is pushing everything into, you used to go to a store and pick up a shirt. Now it's being delivered to your house through a cardboard box.
Right.
One of the things too in this whole issue of recycling, one of the things we're using more and more are lithium batteries. The lithium batteries, an essential component is cobalt. And there are a tremendous number of people in mining cobalt that are killed in the process. And yet there was a recent recycling facility proposed, I believe, in the area of Endicott, New York. And the population in that area was not supportive of the lithium-ion battery recycling facility.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So we do have a couple more questions from our viewers. One is, what could be the role of vertical farming for the future?
Ed, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I think vertical farming, again, in areas where land is preciously and needed, it could have a great role. Vertical greenhouse farming, these areas are just emerging to come, and it could help save the rainforest. One of the reasons Brazil is burning down the rainforest is for food production, and so it could offset or work in trends against those negative forces right now. Yeah, but vertical farming, again, greenhouse farming, those are areas that I think the future is bright.
Great, thank you. One of our audience members asked about the reduction in the use of recycled material and how we can increase the use of recycled materials.
Why don't I tackle that one? I think as consumers, we should, in essence, do what we can to mandate a certain amount of recycled material to be used in the products that we purchase. Look for batteries of which the components in the batteries have been recycled. Understand a little bit what the supply chain is that leads to a product, and is there recycling in that supply chain? I think a more educated consumer and an engaged consumer can help change the paradigm.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to take government intervention. I think things such as the bottle bill is only the beginning, and that packaging requirements and material recycling is something that will have to be mandated.
Great, thank you both. Bob, we are nearing the end of our time, so if you'd like to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Amy. And thank you for all of the participants who've sent in questions, our listeners, I should say. One other thing that we're learning here very clearly is take action on the truths of science. You see two speakers today who believe in science and take action based on the laws of science. And I think of Oren Lyon saying nature's laws are the law, and that's science. And that science, fortunately, will heal itself, but we have to help this process as the fact that we are a large part of this network of use of our resources. We thank you both for your careers and examples, and I'll turn it back over to Rita for closure.
Thank you, Bob. And again, I'll add my thanks to our panelists, Neil and Ed, for such an informative and thought-provoking forum. I hope this has been a great experience for everyone. If you know someone who would enjoy viewing this, or if you'd like to view part or all of this again, we will be posting this forum on the Focus website, focussyracuse.org. Please watch for our follow-up survey that you should receive shortly. We really enjoy and take advantage of the information that you share with us to try to improve your experiences. Also, and importantly, while Focus operates very efficiently on a small budget, we do have costs associated with our operations. We would be very grateful for your donations of $10, $25. We'll take more to help continue our efforts, including doing these Focus forums. And donations can be easily made on our website, focussyracuse.org. Once again, thanks to all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Stay
Thank
healthy.
you.
Thank you.